Despite, quite honestly, quite creepy left-wing fetishizations of her, Ruth Bader Ginsberg actually opposed Roe v. Wade. And of course, this is something that's very topical at the minute. But first and foremost, let's just have a look at some of the things that the left have created to lionize her. Here we can see, if you search Ruth Bader Ginsberg, one of the first things that comes up is Notorious RBG, obviously in reference to Biggie Smalls, or Notorious B.I.G., as some sort of figure of veneration. You can see her with lots of crowns and things of that nature. So yes, for some bizarre reason, they are fetishizing this Supreme Court justice.
And she's a very strange person to fetishize, is she not?
I know, yes. And here we've got some more sort of inspirational quotes and things of that nature. But yes, she's clearly a key figure within
But a lot of this
left-wing
is
circles.
art. It's not photos and things like that on Photoshop. It's people actually going out of their way to make art of this woman, to idolize her and put her on another plane of veneration. It's quite creepy.
So yes, talking of weird and creepy aspects, let's talk about something on the website. American cultural influence in Britain. This is something that me and you did on my series Contemplations, where we talked about how Britain's culture has changed through America's dominant position in the world and how this has influenced our culture. So you get to, if you're American in particular, I imagine this is going to be interesting because we're going to talk about your culture as outsiders.
Yeah.
And I think that it went down very well, actually.
I think so, yeah.
But anyway, enough of that. Let's actually talk about what this Roe v. Wade business is before we talk about why Ruth Bader Ginsburg was against it, because it's not quite as simple as you might think. So,
And you said the BBC actually got this wrong, factually wrong on a number of levels.
yes, and we are going to talk about that. So, the BBC's article titled Roe v. Wade, US Supreme Court may overturn abortion rights, leak suggests. And obviously this is, the Supreme Court are basically talking about their timetabling, their potential discussions that could come up. And I believe it came up because Mississippi wanted, the state of Mississippi wanted to bring this back up in the Supreme Court because they are against abortion. And therefore it was kind of on their timetabling, and it was leaked that it was. So this is how we know about it. But to read from the BBC article, millions of women across the US could soon lose their legal rights to abortion, according to a leaked Supreme Court document. And I think that this is quite a misleading way of putting it, because if
I think that's just wrong.
Well, yes, if Roe v. Wade was struck down, individual states are still free to legislate how they wish, and therefore, as long as you're in a state that supports abortion, then the law won't actually change. And most of the variation around the United States is because of the differing states' legislation. It's not because the federal government mandates it. So it's just a very strange way of putting it. Of course, before Roe v. Wade, the state of New York allowed abortion. So it's not that Roe v. Wade created this legal ability. It was just simply that it mandated that governments have some law that allowed it, state governments, that is. And therefore, you get this variation of Texas having some of the strictest laws, and then you go to places like California, where they're talking about killing newborn babies as they're born naturally, more or less, as in after
crazy.
40 weeks or so, which is appalling.
But one thing about this, though, as well, is that even if you lose the right to an abortion in state, there's still the possibility of travelling interstate to somewhere where it is legal to have the abortion.
And many companies, such as Amazon, have agreed to pay for their employees to do this.
Yeah.
So I think that because private companies have to pay for their employees' medical care, there are going to be lots of companies that are happy to pay for this, which I suppose is a bit
Partly
of a shame,
from
really.
ideological grounds as well.
Yes, absolutely. So the article continues. The document published by Politico suggests that the country's top court is poised to overturn the 1973 decision that legalised abortion nationwide. And this is the most misleading part, because it did not legalise abortion. It was already up to the states whether they wanted to legalise it or not. It was that the federal government forced states to allow it. This isn't legalising it at all.
Yeah, legalising implies it was criminalised beforehand. And it was not, of course. It was legal in some states and illegal in others.
So although this supposed case is a case of abortion rights, it's really more state rights versus federal government. That's at the crux of this. And we'll get into that. And of course, although I'm not an American lawyer, the the Constitution was deliberately written so it was simple enough to be understood. So we're going to look at these constitutional amendments to see why Ruth Bader Ginsburg might have been against this. And I agree with her reading of the Constitution in this case, because she's basically saying, well, why is the Supreme Court doing this? This isn't our right to do this as set up in the Constitution, which we will get onto in a second. So, first and foremost, it's important to understand what the 14th Amendment is, because this is the constitutional rationale for the Roe v. Wade ruling.
Okay.
So, as the Chicago, NBC Chicago says, writing for the majority of opinion in Roe v. Wade, Justice Harry Blackmun said that the court held a woman's right to an abortion was implicit in the right to privacy protected under the 14th Amendment. However, while the Supreme Court ruled in favour of a woman's right to choose, it also acknowledged the state's interest in protecting potential human life. To balance the competing interests, the court established a trimester framework for the legality of abortions. The first trimester up to 12 weeks, the second trimester up to 28 weeks, and third trimester up to 40 weeks. So this is how they separated it in a sort of tiered system, which is why you get many of the state laws at the minute as they are, because of this legal groundwork. So it's worth mentioning, and I'm reading directly from the American Constitution now, that the 14th Amendment states, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." So, interesting here, nor shall any state deprive any person of life. That, I mean, read of that what you will, but to me that sounds like if you regard an unborn baby as a life, which many people do, then surely this is constitutional protection for protecting babies, isn't it?
You would think so. However, I'm sure that clever legal minds will argue that though a baby is a life, it is not a person or something like that. That person is defined in a way that makes it convenient to the interpretation of this statement. But I do agree that is a persuasive point you make.
Yes, and I think that the constitutional arguments are actually far stronger the opposite direction to the way they're interpreted in Roe v. Wade. And I think that although Ginsberg objects based on the state-right dichotomy between giving states the right to self-legislate and having a strong federal government, I think that this is also an important point which I have more or less deduced myself. So I could be wrong, maybe I'm just misinterpreting it. I'm certainly no legal scholar, but that's what it seems like to me. So moving on, this is Fox News reporting on the Supreme Court leak confirms Ruth Bader Ginsburg's prescient warning, about Roe v. Wade. And he goes on to say, Ginsburg firmly supported abortion, but she lamented the court's decision to unilaterally create a new regime on the subject. Ginsburg warned against major judicial shifts in a 1992 lecture at New York University, citing Roe as an example. Measured motions seemed to me right in the main for constitutional as well as common law adjudication, she argued. Doctrinal limbs too swiftly experienced teachers may provide unstable. It's not entirely clear what she's even saying here, because they've really...
Doctrinal limbs too swiftly shaped experienced teachers may prove unstable. So she's saying that a hasty law is not going to work.
Yes, that's my understanding of it, but it's kind of so cut up that you can't really understand the context.
Well, she's not a famous lawyer for nothing, is she?
And she goes on to say, the most prominent example in recent decades is Roe v. Wade. Ginsburg noted that Roe struck down far more than the specific Texas criminal abortion statute at issue in the case, which is a pretty good observation, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it's always a bad sign when new laws are introduced which are broader, which have broad and vague remit, because it's a sign that the court is flexing its muscles.
And it certainly was doing that as well, as in the Roe v. Wade certainly didn't have any reason to be such an all-encompassing thing that was enforced on the whole of America. That was...
Yeah, and I think one thing which is often missed in this is that abortion is not an issue of this magnitude in any other country in the world. And it seems to me the reason it's taken on such controversy in the United States is because the court has decided it over the heads of the legislature and the American citizens.
It's basically at odds with the American Constitution in a way, because the court isn't meant to be an activist court. They're meant to just interpret the laws passed by...
But this was a product of J.K. Galbraith, I think it was, who argued that American lawyers should be activists and they should loosely interpret the Constitution and so on and so forth for the social good and for progression.
Oh dear, it's terrible. So it moves on from another quote. Suppose the courts had stopped there, rightly declaring unconstitutional the most extreme brand of law in the nation, and had not gone on, as the court did in Roe, to fashion a regime blanketing the subject, a set of rules that displaces virtually every state law then in force. She said, a less encompassing Roe, one that merely struck down the extreme Texas law and went no further on that day, I believe will, and summarise why, might have served to reduce rather than fuel controversy, which is more or less the point that you were making then. And I think she's right. It is also worth mentioning the 10th Amendment here. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom and independence, and every power, jurisdiction and right, which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. So yes, this is basically fleshing out that the court cannot make this decision. It's right there in the 10th Amendment that this is basically something that the court has done. They should understand the Constitution being the Supreme Court, but apparently they overlooked this. Obviously, again, no lawyer. However, it seems pretty clear to me at the same time.
Absolutely.
So moving on, leftists have also started cottoning on to the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was perhaps not their friend after all. So here we have the Daily Beast saying Ruth Bader Ginsburg could probably have saved Roe by retiring, which is a bit of a big ask, isn't it? But there's also the fact that she died in office, didn't she? I don't think she planned to die.
But didn't she cling on? Was she not the one who clung on?
She had.
She wasn't replaced by Trump, ideally.
Yes, she had a series of health issues, but she wasn't able to make it through, it seems. So they go on to say, now the question must be asked, could her retirement at the age of 80 in then President Obama's second term have determined America's now inevitable backslide into the neo-dark ages? You can tell this is a leftist outlet, where the freedom to control one's life and destiny no longer exists for those dwelling outside of the womb. In the alternative future, there could still have a conservative majority now, but a narrower 5-4 split that would have at least given a semblance of hope.
You know, this writer would have been very much at home in the 1970s writing pulp fantasy novels. It's just, he needs to calm down when he's writing this kind of thing.
Ginsburg alone could have saved the court, but couldn't have saved the court, sorry, but in giving up her seat, she could have stalled its transformation into a conservative juggernaut and is about to achieve the Republicans' holy grail. Then President Trump was able to seat 3 justices in a single term, thanks to the diabolical strategic manoeuvring of the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who aided and abetted Trump in hijacking of the courts, and with them, our democracy.
Our democracy. Or
not their democracy, our democracy.
Comes out.
Yeah, I don't think...
I'm sorry, this narrative of Trump hijacking the courts, I think, is extremely suspect, because as far as I'm aware, yes, there are some Trump appointees, but the institution of the courts in general is extremely anti-Trump. Just, they come from social background, from training, from statements and everything. They are very much on the other side of the political line.
I know, it's a pretty egregious interpretation, isn't it?
But what can you expect from 1970s pulp fantasy writers?
Exactly. So it's worth mentioning as well that a recent Rasmussen poll found that 48% of US voters would approve of a Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe v. Wade, including 32% who would strongly approve. 45%, which is 3% less, would disapprove of overturning Roe v. Wade, including 35% who would strongly disapprove. So although there are fewer people who would disapprove of overturning it, apparently they feel more strongly about it, which I think is certainly reflected by some of the on-the-street activism. But yes, seems like public mood is certainly slightly in favour of this mood, but of this move, sorry. However, it's worth mentioning that Joe Biden isn't, and this isn't something that he's always always been a supporter of. So Breitbart here reports flip-flopping Joe Biden once voted to overturn Roe v. Wade. And I think saying he's flip-flopping after it was about 50 years ago is a little bit strong, but I'm not exactly trying to be charitable to Joe Biden. So yes, he said, I don't think that a woman has the sole right to say what should happen to her body, he told the Washingtonian in 1974, 1 year after the court legalized abortion. I don't like the Supreme Court's decision on abortion. I think it went too far, he added. Biden doubled down years later in 1982 when he voted to approve a constitutional amendment that would have allowed abortion to become a state issue rather than a federal one. Then Senator Biden was the only Democrat singled out by the New York Times at the time as supporting the amendment that the National Abortion Rights Action League called the most devastating attack yet on abortion rights.
So was this when he was an actual Catholic, potentially?
Perhaps.
Because, I mean, nowadays it seems like you can call yourself a Catholic and be in favour of the most egregious abortion laws on the planet, in America at least. The word seems to have lost all value.
It seems anathema to me to the very foundations of Catholic belief, though, doesn't it? Although I'm not a Catholic myself, obviously, from my understanding. Yes. And as the article points out, on Tuesday, however, President Biden flip-flopped and supported the court's 1973 decision, and I quote here, Roe has been the law of the land for almost 50 years, and basic fairness and the stability of our law demand that it not be overturned. He went on to say, I believe that a woman's right to choose is fundamental. Make of that what you will. However, it is clear to me that the left are probably going to not be very happy about this new revelation about their former idol, Ruth Bader Ginsberg, because even seemingly a liberal justice is opposed to this ruling. And hopefully the Supreme Court will restore state rights.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the premium hangouts we do sometimes, this one between Carl and Harry, on trans regret. So that one's definitely premium. If you want to follow what else Harry's putting out, you can follow him on Getter at Harry Lotus Eater on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.